1838. On a plantation known for hosting illegal slave fights, two identical black men, each standing 6 feet 8 inches, were worth more alive than free. Elijah and Ezekiel Carter were the master's prized property, forced to break bones for profit, trained to obey bells, bets, and biblical justifications. That year, the master announced his boldest exhibition yet. The twins would be ordered to fight each other, proving that blood meant nothing under ownership. He stepped into the pit himself to enforce it, confident no man he owned would ever raise a hand against him. By nightfall, his neck was snapped in front of witnesses. By dawn, the plantation was ash, its ledgers gone, its fighters vanished. What happened in that pit, and why the system moved faster after his death, was never meant to be remembered. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Dawn bled gray across the plantation's eastern fields. Elijah Carter woke to the scrape of iron on wood. The door to his holding cell swung inward. Two overseers stepped through, neither speaking. They never spoke during preparation. Words were for men. Elijah was merchandise. He rose from the dirt floor without hesitation. His body moved through the routine it had learned over 10 years of confinement. Stand, turn, extend wrists. The shackles locked into place with the same dull click they always made. The sound lived in his bones now, deeper than memory. The overseers led him down the narrow corridor between cells. Morning light filtered through gaps in the wooden slats overhead. Elijah counted his steps. 32 to the washing station. Always 32. Cold water hit his skin from the pump above. He stood still while rough hands scrubbed away yesterday's blood and sweat. The preparation was methodical, practical. The master wanted his fighters clean before they bled fresh. Across the yard, through the morning haze, Elijah could see his brother. Ezekiel stood in his own washing station, water streaming down his massive frame. Even at this distance, even after years of forced separation between matches, Elijah knew every angle of his twin's posture. The slight favoring of the left shoulder, the careful way Ezekiel held his neck when exhaustion lived in his muscles. Their eyes met for 1 second. No expression crossed either face. The overseers watched for any sign of communication. Any gesture could mean punishment. Any acknowledgement of their bond could be used as leverage. But in that single glance, Elijah understood everything. Today is different. The knowing settled into his chest like a stone dropping into deep water. Ezekiel felt it too. Something in the rhythm of morning had changed. The overseers moved with unusual precision. The stable master had arrived early, his boots clicking against the hard-packed earth outside the pit. They were being prepared with extra care. Elijah's handlers brought oil next. They rubbed it into his shoulders, his chest, his arms. The oil made skin harder to grip during a fight. It also caught the light, made muscles gleam for spectators who paid premium prices to watch human bodies destroy each other. He stared at the wall while they worked. His face showed nothing. Inside, his mind turned like a wheel. 10 years in the pit had taught him to read patterns. The master never varied routine without purpose. Every decision served profit. Every modification to procedure signaled a shift in the game being played. This morning's preparation felt ceremonial. The handlers brought his fighting clothes, rough canvas trousers, nothing else. Elijah dressed in silence. They checked his hands for hidden objects, though he had never been foolish enough to try smuggling anything into the pit. Rebellion required survival. Survival required patience. Above the preparation yard, wooden stairs creaked. Elijah recognized the footsteps before the man appeared. Everyone on the plantation knew the master's distinctive gait, measured, unhurried, the walk of someone who had never feared anything in his entire life. The master emerged onto the observation platform, overlooking both washing stations. He wore white linen despite the early hour. His hands rested on the railing, manicured fingers drumming a slow rhythm against the wood. "Good morning, gentlemen," the master said. The overseers straightened immediately. "Morning, sir. Are my champions prepared?" "Yes, sir." "Both clean and ready." The master's gaze moved between Elijah and Ezekiel. His expression held the satisfaction of a man admiring his own creation. To him, the twins were not enslaved human beings. They were investments, proof of concept, living demonstrations that even the strongest will could be shaped, controlled, and made profitable. "Magnificent," the master murmured. "Absolutely magnificent." He descended the stairs with careful steps. His boots touched the packed earth of the yard, and he walked slowly between the two washing stations, examining, calculating. "Do you know what makes you valuable?" he asked, though he did not expect an answer. "Symmetry. Perfect, living symmetry. When plantation owners travel 3 counties to watch my exhibitions, they come to see natural law made visible. They come to see proof that ownership transcends blood." Elijah kept his eyes forward. Beside him, he sensed rather than saw the overseer's hand resting near the whip at his belt. The master stopped between them, equidistant from each twin. "Today's exhibition will demonstrate an essential truth. No bond exists that cannot be broken by proper authority. Not friendship, not family, not even the connection between 2 men who shared a womb." Silence filled the yard. Ezekiel's breathing changed slightly. Elijah heard it across the distance, the smallest catch in his brother's throat, understanding arriving like a blade. The master smiled. "You will fight each other today. No performance, no theater. You will fight until one of you cannot continue. This is not a request. This is the natural order asserting itself." He turned and walked back toward the stairs. At the bottom step, he paused. "Prepare the pit for midday. I want maximum attendance. Send word to the neighboring plantations. Tell them this will be an exhibition worth witnessing." "Yes, sir," the stablemaster said. "Should we?" "I will supervise personally," the master interrupted. "A lesson this important requires my direct attention." The sun climbed higher as morning stretched toward noon. Elijah was returned to his cell to wait. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, he could hear the gathering crowd. Horses arriving, voices rising in anticipation, coins changing hands as bets were placed. The fighting pit sat in the center of the plantation's entertainment grounds, circular, 30 feet across, surrounded by wooden bleachers that rose in tiers. The bottom was hard-packed dirt, stained dark from years of blood that had soaked into the earth. When the overseers came for Elijah again, the sun stood directly overhead. They led him through the underground tunnel that connected the holding cells to the pit entrance. His brother walked through the opposite tunnel. Elijah could hear Ezekiel's footsteps echoing through stone, perfectly synchronized with his own. The crowd noise grew louder, hundreds of voices blending into a single roar of expectation. Elijah emerged into blinding sunlight. The bleachers were packed. White faces looked down at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to bloodlust to cold scientific interest. They had paid good money for this spectacle. Across the pit, Ezekiel stood in his own entrance tunnel. Their eyes met again. The master's voice cut through the crowd noise. He stood in a special box seat, elevated above the common spectators, positioned for the perfect view. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "today you will witness something unprecedented. 2 perfect specimens, raised together, trained together, now given the ultimate test of obedience." He gestured toward the twins. "I present the twin titans, in combat against each other, for your education and entertainment." The crowd erupted in cheers. The gate handlers shoved Elijah forward. He stepped into the pit, bare feet touching dirt that had drunk the blood of dozens of men before him. Ezekiel entered from the opposite side. They moved toward the center slowly, circling like animals who had been trained to perform but had never forgotten what they truly were. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, hungry for the first blow. The master raised his hand. Silence rippled across the bleachers. "Before we begin," he said, his voice carrying easily across the arena, "let us remember the wisdom of our Lord." Ephesians 6, verse 5. He opened a small Bible he had brought specifically for this moment. "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ." Several spectators nodded approvingly. A few amens echoed from the crowd. "What you are about to witness," the master continued, "is not cruelty. It is divine order made visible. These two were born as brothers, yes, but they were born into bondage. That bondage supersedes all earthly bonds. Today, they will demonstrate that truth through their own bodies." He closed the Bible with a soft snap. "Their blood will testify to the proper hierarchy of creation." Elijah could taste bile rising in his throat. The master wrapped his sadism in scripture the way other men wrapped meat in paper. It made the violence presentable. It made the audience complicit in their own righteousness. "Begin," the master commanded. The twins circled each other. Elijah raised his fists. Across from him, Ezekiel mirrored the movement. They had fought together countless times, always as partners against other enslaved men from neighboring plantations. They knew each other's patterns better than they knew their own. Ezekiel threw the first punch, a wide hook that looked devastating but carried no real power. Elijah blocked it easily, the impact barely registering against his forearm. The crowd murmured, impatient. Elijah retaliated with a body shot that appeared brutal, but landed with controlled force against Ezekiel's ribs. His brother grunted, selling the pain, and staggered backward 2 steps. "More!" someone shouted from the bleachers. They exchanged blows in a carefully choreographed dance. Each strike looked violent. Each impact sounded authentic. But they had spent 10 years learning exactly how much force was needed to create spectacle, without causing permanent damage. A fist grazed Elijah's jaw. He let his head snap back, added a spray of spit for effect. The crowd roared approval. But underneath the performance, something else was happening. Their eyes stayed locked, speaking, planning. Ezekiel feinted left, and Elijah caught the signal embedded in the movement. His brother's shoulder dropped a fraction too far, a tell they had developed in childhood, before the fighting pit, when they had played games in the dirt behind their mother's cabin. Not today. Not like this. Elijah responded with a combination that drove Ezekiel toward the pit wall, but avoided his brother's face entirely. Ezekiel absorbed the blows against his shoulders and arms, areas that could take punishment. Minutes passed. The fight continued. Neither twin committed to a finishing blow. The crowd grew restless. "They're holding back," a spectator yelled. "Make them fight proper." The master's expression darkened. He stood from his seat, his white linen catching the noon sun. He gestured to the gate handlers. "Stop," he ordered. The twins froze immediately. Years of conditioning made their bodies obey before their minds could process the command. The master descended from his box seat. He walked down the bleacher stairs with deliberate slowness, each footfall a demonstration of absolute authority. The crowd fell silent, sensing something important was about to happen. He entered the pit through the main gate. The dirt crunched under his expensive boots as he walked between the twins. Up close, his perfume mixed with their sweat. The contrast was obscene. His cleanliness against their exhaustion, his freedom against their chains. "You disappoint me," he said quietly. His voice carried disappointment rather than anger, which was far more dangerous. "After everything I have invested in your training, after all the care I have taken to perfect you." He turned to face Elijah directly. Do you think I cannot see your performance? Do you believe I am a fool?" Elijah kept his eyes lowered. "No, sir." "Then why do you insult me with this pathetic display?" The master stepped closer, close enough that Elijah could smell tobacco on his breath. "Why do you refuse to demonstrate the lesson I have designed?" Ezekiel spoke from behind them. "We are brothers." The master turned slowly. "What did you say?" "We are brothers," Ezekiel repeated. His voice was steady despite the danger in those words. "We shared our mother's body. We shared her milk. We share blood. You cannot command us to destroy that." The crowd rustled. Several spectators exchanged glances. Open defiance from enslaved people was rare enough to be genuinely shocking. The master's face remained calm. He walked to Ezekiel, studying him with the detached interest of a scientist examining an unexpected result. "You share blood," the master repeated. "How touching. How very sentimental." He smiled. "Let me explain something about blood, about family, about all the natural bonds you believe supersede my authority." He gestured toward the holding cells beneath the bleachers. "I own 47 enslaved people on this plantation. Men, women, children. Some of them are parents, some are siblings. Many have bonds they believe are sacred." The twins understood where this was going before he finished. "If you do not fight, truly fight, with the intent to win, I will select 10 of them at random. I will have them brought to this pit, and I will have them executed in front of everyone here." The master's voice never rose above conversational volume. "Their blood will be your responsibility. Their deaths will be your choice." Ezekiel's hands clenched into fists. "You would murder?" "I would enforce consequences for disobedience," the master interrupted. "Nothing more, nothing less. This is how order is maintained. This is how you learn that your feelings, your bonds, your precious brotherhood means absolutely nothing against my will." He turned and began walking back toward the gate. "You have until I reach my seat to begin fighting properly. If I am not satisfied with your commitment, the executions start immediately." The crowd watched in absolute silence. Elijah's mind raced. 10 people, innocent people, who had done nothing except exist in proximity to this man's cruelty. He saw their faces in his memory. The cook who sometimes saved extra cornbread, the stable boy who whispered news between cells, the old woman who hummed hymns while working in the fields. The master's boots crunched against dirt. 5 steps from the gate. Ezekiel moved closer to Elijah. Their shoulders nearly touched. In that proximity, Elijah could feel his brother's breathing, rapid and shallow, could feel the rage vibrating through Ezekiel's massive frame. The master reached the gate. His hand touched the wood. In that moment, something broke. Not their will, not their obedience, something deeper. The final thread of belief that survival meant submission. The last remnant of hope that patience would somehow lead to mercy. Elijah's eyes met Ezekiel's eyes. The decision happened between them without words, without planning. A lifetime of shared experience compressed into one instant of absolute clarity. They moved as one organism. Elijah lunged forward, closing the distance to the master in 3 massive strides. Ezekiel came from the opposite angle, cutting off escape. The crowd gasped, thinking the twins were finally turning on each other. The master turned, surprise flickering across his face for the first time. Elijah's hand shot out and grabbed the master's collar. Ezekiel's hand clamped around the back of the man's neck. For one frozen second, the master's eyes widened with genuine fear. Then, they twisted. The sound of the master's neck breaking was surprisingly quiet. A soft crack, like a stick snapping underfoot. His body went instantly limp between their hands. The twins held him there, suspended, making absolutely certain the crowd saw everything. making absolutely certain there could be no doubt about what had just happened. Then they let him drop. The master's body hit the dirt and lay still. His white linen soaked up blood from his mouth. His eyes stared at nothing. The silence in the arena was total. Elijah stood over the corpse, chest heaving, hands still extended. Beside him, Ezekiel's face showed no expression at all. The crowd remained frozen in their seats. No one moved. No one screamed. The moment was too enormous for immediate comprehension. The first scream came from a woman in the second row of bleachers. Then another voice joined, and another, until the entire crowd erupted into chaos. People scrambled backward, trampling over benches, shoving past neighbors. Some ran for the exit gates. Others stood frozen, staring at the impossible sight before them. Elijah's heart hammered against his ribs. His hands still tingled from the violence they had just committed. Beside him, Ezekiel breathed in short, sharp gasps. The moment demanded action before thought could paralyze them. "The cells!" Elijah shouted over the growing panic. They ran together toward the holding area beneath the bleachers. The gate handlers had already fled, leaving the iron doors unlocked in their terror. Inside the shadowed corridor, 24 enslaved fighters sat chained to the walls, their faces registering shock and confusion. Ezekiel grabbed the key ring hanging from a peg and moved down the line, unlocking shackles with practiced efficiency. "Get up! Move! Now!" The first man freed was Marcus, a fighter from a plantation 20 miles south. His wrists bore fresh welts from the iron cuffs. He stared at the twins without comprehension. "The master's dead," Elijah said flatly. "We killed him. You stay here. You die with him." Understanding flooded Marcus's face. He grabbed the keys from Ezekiel and began freeing others while the twins worked on different chains. More fighters stumbled out of the cells, their expressions ranging from disbelief to savage joy. Some immediately ran for the exit. Others hesitated, uncertain what freedom looked like after years of captivity. Outside, the crowd continued its stampede. Horses whinnied in terror. Carriages overturned as drivers abandoned their posts. The wealthy spectators who had come to watch bloodsport now fled in animal panic, their fine clothes covered in dust and sweat. Elijah spotted the lamp oil storage near the pit wall. Large clay jugs lined up in careful rows, fuel for the torches that illuminated night fights. He grabbed one jug, his muscles straining under the weight. "Zeke!" He gestured toward the wooden bleachers. Ezekiel understood immediately. He seized another jug and splashed oil across the sun-dried timber. The liquid spread dark and slick, soaking into the grain. Elijah moved to the opposite side, dousing the support beams and the fighter cells they had just emptied. Marcus and the others watched for a heartbeat, then joined the effort. They grabbed jugs and spread oil across every flammable surface, moving with urgent purpose. The pit that had held them became their first target, their first act of total erasure. Elijah found a torch still burning in its wall bracket. He pulled it free and held it high. "Everyone out," he commanded. The fighters scrambled through the gates. When the last man cleared the threshold, Elijah threw the torch onto the oil-soaked bleachers. The fire caught instantly. Flames raced up the wooden structure with hungry speed, consuming 10 years of violence in seconds. Black smoke billowed skyward, visible for miles. The heat drove them backward, intense and immediate. "The big house," Ezekiel said. "The ledgers." They ran across the open ground between the pit and the plantation's main building. The master's residence stood 3 stories tall, white columns gleaming in the afternoon sun. Through the windows, Elijah could see house servants fleeing, carrying whatever possessions they could grab. The twins burst through the front door. Inside, the entrance hall showcased wealth built on suffering. Crystal chandeliers, imported furniture, oil paintings of the master's ancestors staring down with dead eyes. Elijah headed straight for the study. He had been inside exactly once before, brought to stand as decoration while the master entertained buyers. He remembered the massive desk, the locked cabinets, the shelves of leather-bound books. The ledgers sat in neat rows, organized by year. Each volume documented property, profits, purchases, hundreds of names reduced to monetary values, children priced by age and projected strength, families separated and recorded with clinical efficiency. Elijah swept his arm across the shelf. The books crashed to the floor. He grabbed the nearest oil lamp from the desk and smashed it against the pile. Glass shattered. Oil spread across leather covers and yellowed pages. A match from the master's smoking box. One strike. The ledgers ignited. Orange flames consumed names, numbers, the entire apparatus of documentation that made enslavement legitimate. Smoke filled the study, thick and acrid. Ezekiel appeared in the doorway. Field hands are running. Some went toward the north road. Most scattered into the woods. Good. Elijah watched the fire spread to the curtains, the desk, the walls. Let it all burn. They moved through the house room by room, spreading fire systematically. The parlor where the master entertained guests, the dining hall where he hosted refined dinners, the bedroom where he slept in comfort, while people suffered in chains. Every space became fuel. By the time they emerged onto the front lawn, flames roared from every window. The roof timbers cracked and groaned. Part of the second floor collapsed inward, with a sound like thunder. The sun touched the western horizon, painting the sky blood red. The fire's glow competed with the sunset, turning the plantation grounds into a vision of judgment. Field hands gathered in small clusters, their faces illuminated by flames. Some held tools they had grabbed as weapons. Others carried children or supported elderly workers who could barely walk. Everyone stared at the destruction with expressions that mixed terror and exhilaration. Elijah climbed onto an overturned wagon so he could see the crowd. His voice carried across the assembled people. "Anyone who stays will be killed," he said. "Patrols will come. Militia. They will show no mercy. Your only chance is the swamp. Move now while darkness helps us." He jumped down and began walking toward the tree line. Ezekiel fell into step beside him. Behind them, the crowd hesitated for only a moment before following. They moved as a group of 60 or more, streaming away from the burning plantation toward the dense vegetation marking the swamp's edge. The twins led, using their size to break through undergrowth and create a path for those behind them. The swamp swallowed them. Moonlight filtered through cypress branches, creating shifting patterns of silver and shadow. Water soaked their legs as they waded through shallow channels. Insects swarmed. The air hung thick with humidity and the smell of rotting vegetation. They walked for hours. Some people fell and had to be helped up. Others carried children, who cried from exhaustion and fear. The twins kept moving, driven by the knowledge that distance meant survival. Around midnight, they reached a small island of solid ground surrounded by dark water. Reeds grew thick around the edges, creating natural concealment. "Here," Elijah said. "We rest here." People collapsed immediately. They dropped where they stood, too exhausted to care about comfort. Parents cradled children. The elderly lay in the mud with expressions of profound relief. Elijah and Ezekiel found a space near the island's center. They sat with their backs against a fallen log, legs stretched out, bodies finally still after hours of constant motion. "We did it," Ezekiel whispered. His voice held wonder and disbelief in equal measure. "We actually did it." Elijah closed his eyes. His muscles screamed. His hands still shook slightly from adrenaline. But underneath the exhaustion, something else bloomed. Something he had not felt in 10 years. Hope. They had killed the master, burned his empire, freed his property. And now they sat in darkness, unchained, choosing their own path. For the first time since childhood, the future belonged to them. Sunrise came pale and hesitant through the cypress canopy. Elijah woke to dampness soaking through his shirt, and the low murmur of voices around him. His body ached from sleeping on hard ground. Every muscle protested as he pushed himself upright. The island looked different in daylight. Smaller, more exposed. What had seemed like protective cover in darkness now appeared fragile. The reeds provided concealment from certain angles, but anyone standing on higher ground could see movement. People stirred throughout the camp. Children whimpered from hunger and cold. Adults checked on family members, counting heads, confirming survival. The night's rest had restored some strength, but exhaustion still marked every face. Ezekiel sat nearby, already awake. He watched the group with an expression Elijah recognized from childhood, his brother's calculating look, the face he wore when solving problems too complex for simple solutions. "We lost 3, Ezekiel said quietly, fell behind during the march. Old Samuel, the woman who worked in the laundry, and a field hand named Thomas." Elijah absorbed this information. 3 people who had reached freedom only to lose it in darkness and confusion. He wondered if they were still alive, hiding somewhere in the swamp, or if they had been caught already. "Injuries?" he asked. "Plenty. Cuts from thorns, twisted ankles. Marcus stepped on something sharp in the water. His foot's infected already. The children are sick from bad water." Ezekiel paused. "We need food, medicine. These people won't survive long on hope alone." Elijah stood and surveyed the camp more carefully. 60 people meant 60 mouths requiring food, 60 bodies needing shelter, 60 lives depending on decisions the twins had never been trained to make. A woman approached, carrying a small child. She was young, maybe 20, her dress torn and muddy from the night's journey. Her eyes held a question she seemed afraid to voice. "What happens now?" she finally asked. Elijah had no answer that would satisfy her. He had led these people away from certain death, but could not promise them certain life. The swamp offered temporary concealment, nothing more. "We keep moving," he said, "deeper into the swamp. Put distance between us and the plantation. For how long?" "As long as it takes." The woman studied his face, searching for reassurance he could not provide. Then she nodded and walked back to her spot, whispering to others nearby. Word spread through the camp. They would move again soon. Marcus limped over, his injured foot wrapped in torn cloth already stained with blood and pus. His face had gone gray with pain and fever, but his voice remained steady. "Patrols will come by afternoon," he said. "Maybe sooner." The fire was visible for 20 miles. Every plantation owner in the county knows something happened. "How do you know about patrols?" Ezekiel asked. "I ran before. Got caught after 3 days." Marcus touched a scar on his neck, a brand mark partially hidden by his collar. "They use dogs. Good ones, trained to track through water and mud. And they bring militia, armed men who get paid by the head for returning property." Elijah felt the weight of this knowledge settle on him. 60 people could not move silently through a swamp. They left tracks, disturbed vegetation, created paths that dogs would follow easily. Every moment spent resting gave pursuers time to organize. "We leave now," he said, before full light. They roused the camp. People gathered what few possessions they had carried from the plantation. Some had grabbed tools. Others held blankets or cooking implements. Most had nothing except the clothes on their backs. Elijah found the strongest among them and organized them into a rough structure. The healthy would help the sick. Those who knew the terrain would guide. Everyone else would follow in a line, staying close, moving as quietly as possible. They had no food except what some had grabbed during the escape. A few potatoes, dry cornbread. One woman had a sack of dried beans. Elijah gathered these meager supplies and distributed them with strict instructions. 1 handful per person. Make it last. "We don't know when we'll find more," a man protested. "Children need more than a handful. Children need their parents alive," Elijah countered. "We ration or we starve. Your choice." The man backed down, but resentment flickered in his eyes. Leadership, Elijah realized, meant making decisions that earned hatred. He accepted this burden the same way he had accepted chains, as a necessity of survival. They began moving shortly after sunrise. The twins led, breaking through undergrowth and testing ground for solid footing. Behind them, the line stretched out, 60 souls connected by shared desperation. The swamp seemed endless, water and vegetation in every direction. Occasionally they crossed patches of solid ground, small islands offering brief relief from wading. But mostly they moved through ankle-deep water that concealed roots and holes designed to snap legs or twist ankles. Around midday, they stopped at a clearing where a fallen cypress created a natural bridge. Elijah called for rest while he and Ezekiel scouted ahead. During the break, a woman approached. She had worked in the big house, Elijah remembered. Her name was Sarah. She wore better clothes than the field hands, though they were now as filthy and torn as everyone else's. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said. Her voice trembled. "About the master?" Ezekiel turned toward her. "What about him?" "He had insurance. I heard him talking with his business partners, the plantation, the buildings, even the slaves. All of it insured through companies in Charleston and Savannah." Elijah felt ice spread through his chest. "Explain." "If property is destroyed or lost, the insurance pays." The master told his partners it was brilliant. No matter what happened, he would profit. Fire, flood, uprising. The companies would cover the losses. The implications crashed down on Elijah like physical weight. They had not destroyed the master's wealth. They had triggered a payment. The insurance companies would investigate. They would send agents. They would demand accountability and compensation. More than that, they would want to prove that insured property could be recovered, to show that policies had value beyond just collecting premiums. Every insurance company would have incentive to see the escaped slaves returned as proof that their business model worked. "How much was the policy worth?" Ezekiel asked. "I don't know exact numbers, but the master said it covered full replacement value. Buildings, equipment, livestock." Sarah paused. "People." Elijah looked at his brother. They had believed killing the master would end his power, that burning the plantation would erase his influence. But Sarah's revelation proved their naivety. The master had built protections that outlived him, systems that functioned without his presence. They had not escaped one master. They had challenged an entire network of masters, all connected through money and legal agreements that stretched across state lines. "This changes things," Ezekiel said quietly. "It changes nothing," Elijah responded. "We keep moving. We keep these people alive. The rest we figure out as we go." Sarah nodded and returned to the group. The twins stood in silence, processing what they had learned. The sun passed its peak and began descending toward afternoon. Shadows lengthened across the water. Birds called from somewhere in the canopy, their songs echoing through humid air. Then Elijah heard it, distant but unmistakable, the sound that transformed their escape into a hunt. Dogs barking, far away, perhaps miles, but definitely dogs. Multiple voices raised in excitement, the sound trackers made when they caught a scent. Ezekiel heard it too. His expression hardened. "They're coming," he said. The group moved with renewed urgency after hearing the dogs. Fear provided energy that exhaustion had stolen. Parents carried children who could not keep pace. The stronger supported the weak. Everyone understood what those distant barks meant. The hunters were coming. Elijah pushed them hard through the afternoon. They crossed deeper into the swamp, where water rose to their waists. The cold helped mask their scent, but it also sapped strength from bodies already depleted. People stumbled, some fell. Each time, Others pulled them upright and kept moving. By dusk, they reached a section where ancient oaks created a canopy so thick that twilight arrived early beneath the branches. Elijah called for rest. People collapsed where they stood, too tired to seek dry ground. The twins left Ezekiel's trusted lieutenant, a field hand named Jacob, in charge. Then they moved back the way they had come, retracing their path to gather information about their pursuers. They traveled light and fast, unencumbered by the group's needs. Within an hour, they reached the swamp's outer edge, where solid ground began. There they climbed a tall cypress and settled into its upper branches to watch and listen. The riders arrived as full darkness fell. Torches appeared through the trees, dozens of them, carried by men on horseback. The hunting party was larger than Elijah had anticipated. Not just plantation owners and overseers, but professional slave catchers brought in from other counties. Men who made their living returning human property. The twins watched from their hidden position as the hunters established a temporary camp at the swamp's edge. Someone built a fire. Dogs milled around, straining at chains, eager to continue pursuit. Voices carried clearly through the night air. 60 head ran, one man said. Maybe more. The fire destroyed most records, but the insurance company's representative counted empty cabins. 60, another voice responded. That's a fortune in flesh. The policy will pay, but recovery means bonus payments. $5 per head returned alive. More for the twins. There's a special bounty on them. Elijah felt Ezekiel tense beside him on the branch. They listened more carefully. How much? Someone asked. $100. Each. The insurance company wants them as examples. Public whipping and sale to the worst plantation they can find. Something to discourage others from getting ideas. Laughter rippled through the group. Dark, anticipatory laughter that spoke of men who enjoyed their work. What do they look like? A new voice asked. I heard stories, but nothing specific. Twin brothers, identical, both standing 6'8", built like oxen. They were the master's prize fighters, killed him with their bare hands during an exhibition match, snapped his neck like kindling. Jesus Christ. Gets better. They're supposed to be smart, educated somehow despite the law. One of them can read, maybe both. The overseer said they were always planning something, always watching. Dangerous property, the most dangerous kind. Property that thinks it's human. More laughter. Then someone mentioned the fire. Burned everything. Big house, slave quarters, fighting pit, even the stables. Nothing left but ash and bones. Found the master's body in the ruins. Had to identify him by his pocket watch. The insurance investigator is pissed. Says this kind of destruction invites more rebellion. Wants a public recovery to show that insured property stays insured, one way or another. The conversation shifted to tactic. The hunters discussed their strategy for the morning. They would split into 3 groups. One would circle east, another west, while the main force pushed straight into the swamp with the dogs. They planned to squeeze the escapees between converging lines, forcing them into open water where they could be easily captured. What about killing them? Someone asked. Dead property is still property. Easier to transport. Insurance only pays full value for live recovery. Corpses get 50%. The company wants them alive if possible. Especially the twins. They want those bastards on an auction block in Charleston, in chains, broken publicly. And if they resist, then we kill them and take the 50%. Either way, we profit. Elijah had heard enough. He signaled to Ezekiel, and they descended from the tree, moving silently back into the swamp. They did not speak until they were well away from the camp. $300 total for both of us, Ezekiel said quietly. That's more than most men make in 5 years, plus $5 per head for everyone else, Elijah added. They're hunting for profit, not justice. That makes them predictable. They walked in silence for a while, navigating by moonlight filtering through the canopy. The water around them reflected silver, creating an otherworldly landscape that felt disconnected from the horror they had just witnessed. "We can't outrun them," Ezekiel finally said. "Not with 60 people. The children alone slow us to a crawl. And Marcus's infection is spreading. He won't last another day without medicine." "I know. The hunters will catch up by tomorrow afternoon. Maybe sooner if the dogs pick up a strong scent." "I know that too." Ezekiel stopped walking. Elijah turned to face him. "We're thinking the same thing," Ezekiel said. "I can see it in your face." Elijah nodded. They had always been able to read each other. Twin instinct, some called it. Elijah thought it was simpler than that. They had survived by understanding each other perfectly, by anticipating reactions and sharing thoughts without words. "If we split from the group," Elijah said slowly, "the hunters will follow us. We're worth more than all the others combined. Pride aside, economics alone guarantees they'll chase the bigger prize. We draw them south," Ezekiel continued, "away from the group. Give Jacob time to move everyone north toward the river settlements. Some of those communities shelter runaways. We become the targets. We were always the targets. Now, we just make it official." They stood in the dark water, facing each other, acknowledging what this decision meant. They would be hunted by professional trackers, men with dogs and guns and financial incentive to bring them back alive or dead. The odds of survival dropped dramatically, but the alternative was leading 60 people into certain capture. Children would be sold away from parents, families destroyed. Everyone who had tasted freedom for 2 days would spend the rest of their lives in chains, probably worked to death as punishment for running. "We do it tonight," Elijah said. "Before dawn, we tell Jacob the plan and leave clear tracks heading south. Make ourselves impossible to miss." They returned to the group's resting place. People slept fitfully, some keeping watch, others too exhausted to care about safety. Elijah found Jacob and pulled him aside. Ezekiel joined them. "We're leaving," Elijah told him, "before sunrise. We're going to draw the hunters away." Jacob's eyes widened. "That's suicide. That's strategy. They want us more than anyone else. Let them have what they want. You'll be caught. Maybe, maybe not. But while they're chasing us, you move everyone north, fast as possible. Head for the river communities. There are people there who might help." Jacob looked between the twins. "You're sacrificing yourselves." "We're giving everyone else a chance," Ezekiel corrected. "That's not sacrifice. That's mathematics." They spent the next hour preparing Jacob for leadership. Elijah explained the route north, the landmarks to watch for, the places where the swamp gave way to solid ground. Ezekiel identified the strongest members of the group who could help maintain order and pace. "Keep them moving," Elijah instructed. "No matter what. Don't stop for anything except absolute necessity. Every mile you put between yourselves and the hunters increases your odds." "What about you?" Jacob asked. "Don't worry about us. We've survived worse than dogs and rifle." This was not entirely true, but Jacob seemed to accept it. He gripped both twins' hands, his expression mixing gratitude with grief. "You're good men," he said. "Better than any I've known." Elijah did not respond to this. He had never considered himself good. Survival did not require goodness. It required decisiveness and the ability to make hard choices without hesitation. They left before dawn, while the camp still slept. Only Jacob watched them go, standing guard as the twins moved south through the dark water. Ezekiel took the lead initially, breaking branches and disturbing vegetation in ways that created obvious signs of passage. Elijah followed, occasionally stepping onto muddy banks and leaving clear boot prints. They wanted the trail to be unmistakable. As the sun began rising, painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink, they reached a section of swamp that bordered open grassland. Here they deliberately climbed onto dry ground and walked through tall grass that bent beneath their weight, creating a path visible from a distance. Elijah looked back at their tracks, perfect, undeniable. Any tracker would see them and know exactly which direction they had gone. "They'll find this by mid-morning," he said. Ezekiel nodded. "And they'll come fast. Dogs love a fresh trail." They stood in the early morning light, two massive figures silhouetted against the rising sun. Behind them lay the swamp and the people they had chosen to protect. Ahead lay open country, hunters, and an uncertain future. "No going back now," Ezekiel said. "There was never any going back," Elijah replied. "Not from the moment we killed him." They turned south and began walking, leaving tracks that could not be missed, choosing to become targets so that others might become free. The sun hung directly overhead, its relentless heat watching over the events unfolding below. A convoy rumbled along a dusty rural road, a small caravan of slave trader wagons bound for the market. The men driving them laughed, cracked jokes, blissfully unaware of the threat lurking in the surrounding thicket. Elijah and Ezekiel crouched low, deeply focused, using the skills honed in the pit fights, a place where observation and anticipation had been paramount. They listened first, assessing number and movement. Then they struck with precise synchrony. Branches snapped as the twins launched themselves from the concealment of the woods. Their massive forms were fury incarnate, moving faster than their enemies could react. They targeted the horses first, disabling their momentum with strategically placed cuts to the harnesses. The chaos sent traders tumbling, scrambling for footing and control. Elijah sprinted forward, launching himself onto the lead wagon, seizing the driver's whip and pulling him down with one swift motion. Below him, Ezekiel confronted the stunned traders. His towering presence and cultivated aggression drove their courage into retreat. A tossed lamp shattered brilliantly against a wagon, flames leaping from its contents. Within moments, the caravan was an inferno of smoke and disorder. Elijah tore the locks from shackles and cuffs. Men, women, and even children, their eyes wide in terror, stumbled from the cages into sudden light. "Go!" Ezekiel's deep voice commanded. "Into the trees. Freedom lies beyond the horizon." Freed captives hesitated only moments before rushing, some falling, others leaping, into the encompassing embrace of the woods, through foliage, into promised escape. As night fell, the twins found refuge among spirit-weary villagers. These communities, ever resentful of their coercive status in the system, offered food and shelter. The villagers' nervous thankfulness mixed with fear. The twins' actions carried risk and retaliation for anyone seen aiding them. In whispered conversations too quiet to reach unwanted ears, the tales of the twin giants spread. Those who had been saved spoke of them reverently. Those who harbored them shared guarded glances, but offered what food they could spare. Hope rekindled in small, shared moments of connection. Yet, beneath the surface, tension simmered. Word of their sabotage would travel. The system they defied responded with a violence equally calculated. Retaliation loomed, a shadow gaining on the light cast by what the twins dared to illuminate. Morning would arrive soon enough, full of new dangers, but, for now, whispers carried far, mixing dread with possibility, the twins' legacy growing in stature with every telling. Morning arrived not with birdsong, but with screams. Elijah jerked awake in the barn loft where they'd sheltered overnight. The sound tore through the pre-dawn stillness, high, desperate, unmistakably human. Beside him, Ezekiel was already moving, scrambling toward the ladder with the instinct of men who had learned to respond before thought could slow them. They reached the barn door as flames began licking the roof of the main house. The family who had given them food, who had shared stories of their own lost children, sold years ago, who had smiled, actually smiled, at the hope the twins represented. That family now knelt in their nightclothes in the dirt yard, while mounted men circled them like wolves around cornered prey. "This is what happens," the lead rider's voice carried across the clearing. He held a torch high, its light dancing across his features. "This is what happens when you harbor property that ain't yours!" Elijah's hand shot out, gripping Ezekiel's arm before his brother could charge forward. The pressure was iron, unyielding. "There's 8 of them," Elijah whispered, his voice barely audible. "Armed, mounted. We'd be dead before we crossed half the distance. They're burning them alive." Ezekiel's words came through clenched teeth. "Because of us." The old man who had shared his cornbread raised his head. Even from this distance, even in the flickering torchlight, the twins could see his expression. Not accusation. Resignation. As if he'd always known this ending waited somewhere down the road he'd chosen to walk. The torch fell. Flames caught the dry wood with eager hunger. The screaming intensified. Ezekiel made a sound low in his throat, something animal and broken. Elijah pulled harder, dragging his brother backward into the shadows of the barn. "We can't save them. We can only make their sacrifice mean something." Sacrifice? Ezekiel rounded on him, and for the first time in their lives, real fury blazed between them. They didn't sacrifice themselves. We sacrificed them. We brought this down on their heads. You think I don't know that? I think you're so focused on the next target you've forgotten we're painting them on innocent backs. The accusation hung between them like smoke. Outside, the riders were leaving, their work complete. Their laughter carried on the wind, casual, satisfied, already forgetting the lives they'd just ended. The twins waited until the hoofbeats faded before emerging. The house was fully engulfed now, the heat pushing them back even from yards away. There would be no rescue, no burial, nothing but ash, and the memory of kindness repaid with horror. "We split up," Elijah said finally. "What?" "We're too recognizable together. 2 giants traveling as a pair. Every patrol from here to the coast is looking for that. We separate. We double our chances." Ezekiel stared at him. "You want to abandon? I want to survive long enough to make this mean something more than just bodies in our wake." Elijah's voice was flat, emotionless in the way it only became when he was burying rage too deep for expression. "We need to stop being a story they can tell. We need to become a strategy they can't predict." The argument might have continued, but intelligence reached them that afternoon, through the network of enslaved field hands who moved information faster than any telegraph. Another safe house burned. 3 more families punished for rumored assistance. The retaliation was systematic, calculated to turn every potential ally into a cautionary tale. By evening, guilt had fractured something fundamental between the twins. They barely spoke as they prepared for the night's operation, a planned ambush to protect a safe house the network deemed crucial, a place where escaped slaves gathered before attempting the journey north, a target the system would inevitably discover. "We defend it," Ezekiel had insisted. "No more running. No more letting others pay our price." Elijah had agreed, but the set of his jaw suggested different reasoning. This wasn't about protection. This was about drawing fire, becoming the targets again, redirecting the system's violence away from the defenseless. They positioned themselves in the woods surrounding the safe house just after midnight. The building sat in a small clearing, lamplight visible through cracks in the shuttered windows. Inside, 7 people waited for morning and the guide who would lead them to the next station. The attack came at 2 a.m. 20 riders, not 8. Organized, coordinated, moving with military precision rather than the chaotic brutality of the earlier raid. These weren't opportunistic slave catchers. These were professionals. "It's a trap," Elijah hissed. "They knew we'd come. The people inside are bait." But Ezekiel was already moving, his massive frame crashing through underbrush toward the clearing. His roar, that same sound he'd used in the pit to intimidate opponents, echoed through the night. For a moment, it worked. Riders wheeled their horses in confusion. Gunshots cracked the darkness, muzzle flashes creating brief daylight. Elijah had no choice. He charged after his brother. The fight was chaos incarnate. The twins used their size and strength as weapons, pulling men from saddles, using horses as shields. But these hunters had come prepared. Nets dropped from trees. Ropes snaked through the darkness. They weren't trying to kill the twins, they were trying to capture them. Elijah saw it happening as if time had slowed. Ezekiel, surrounded, fighting 3 men while 2 more circled behind with chains. The same chains they'd worn in the pit. The same chains they'd broken just days ago. A rifle butt caught Elijah across the temple. He went down hard, tasting copper and dirt. Through blurred vision, he saw Ezekiel disappear under a mass of bodies, saw the chains wrap around his brother's arms and legs, saw the triumph on the hunters' faces. Run. The thought came from somewhere primal, from the part of him that had always been the survivor, the strategist, the one who calculated odds before emotion. Run now, or die here. He ran. Blood ran into his eyes from the gash on his forehead. His side screamed where someone had landed a knife thrust, shallow but burning. Behind him, Ezekiel's voice rose one final time, not in pain, but in fury, bellowing his brother's name. Elijah ran deeper into the woods, branches tearing at his face and arms. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs trembled. He ran until the sounds of the fight faded into terrible silence. Dawn found him collapsed against a fallen log, shaking from blood loss and shock. The wound in his side had stopped bleeding, but every breath sent fresh pain radiating through his ribs. Ezekiel was gone. His brother, his twin, his other half, the only person in the world who understood what they'd survived and what they'd become, was in chains again. Or worse. The system had taken everything from them once before. Now it had taken the one thing they'd managed to keep. Elijah pressed his forehead against rough bark and finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what the night had cost. The afternoon sun pressed down on Elijah like a physical weight as he crouched in the hollow of a dead oak, listening to voices drift through the forest. 3 hunters passed within 20 feet of his hiding spot. Their conversation casual, almost cheerful. "They're building the scaffold in Richmond proper," one said. "Governor wants everyone to see. Make it a proper spectacle. Hanging? Burning first, I heard. Then what's left gets hung. Send a message that sticks." "When?" "Sunset tomorrow. Gives folk time to travel. Gonna be the biggest crowd since the Nat Turner trials." Elijah waited until their footsteps faded completely before allowing himself to breathe fully. His side throbbed where he'd wrapped the knife wound with strips torn from his shirt. The bleeding had stopped hours ago, but infection was already setting in. He could feel the heat radiating from the injury, smell the sour wrongness of it. None of that mattered. Ezekiel was alive. The knowledge hit him with more force than relief. Alive meant captive. Alive meant suffering. Alive meant the system had what it wanted most: a symbol to destroy publicly, thoroughly, unforgettably. They would make his brother's death a story told for generations, unless Elijah could reach him first. He moved through the forest with mechanical precision, every step calculated to avoid noise or visible trail. The fighting pit had taught him many things beyond violence. It had taught him to read terrain, to anticipate ambush points, to understand that strength meant nothing without strategy. By mid-afternoon, he'd put 5 miles between himself and the Safe House massacre. His path took him parallel to the main road toward Richmond, staying deep enough in the trees to avoid patrols, but close enough to track traffic. The road was busy. Wagons, riders, even families on foot, all heading in the same direction, all talking about the same thing. They caught one of the twin titans, the ones that killed Master Thornwood. I heard they ate children. Demons in human form. That's what the pastor said. Gonna teach them all a lesson about rising up. Elijah listened to his own mythology grow more monstrous with each retelling. Good. Let them expect a demon. Let them search for something inhuman and terrifying. They would look right past a wounded, exhausted man if he moved carefully enough. At a creek crossing, he stopped to wash blood from his face and arms. The reflection staring back from the water looked nothing like the fighter who'd once been paraded as the master's prize. This person was haggard, hollow-eyed, marked by violence and loss. His size would always betray him, but perhaps the rest could be disguised. He waited at the creek until another group of travelers approached, free black laborers by their clothing, heading to Richmond for work. Elijah recognized the particular way they moved, the careful neutrality of their expressions. These were men who survived by being useful without being threatening, visible without being memorable. He fell in step behind them as they passed, keeping enough distance to seem separate, but close enough to appear part of their general direction of travel. One of the men glanced back, eyes widening slightly at Elijah's size. Elijah met his gaze steadily, then let his shoulders slump, his head drop, his entire posture collapse into the beaten-down shape of someone thoroughly defeated. The man's expression shifted from alarm to recognition, not of who Elijah was, but of what he represented. Another broken tool of the system, moving because movement was required. The man turned away without speaking. They reached the outskirts of Richmond as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The city swelled with visitors, streets clogged with commerce and spectacle seekers. Vendors sold food and drink. Children ran underfoot. The atmosphere carried a festival quality that made Elijah's stomach turn. They were gathering to watch his brother die. He split from the laborers at a construction site, where crews were assembling something in the city square. Even from blocks away, Elijah could see the scaffold rising against the sky, a platform built high enough for visibility, strong enough to hold both victim and audience attention. Workers swarmed the structure like ants, hammering boards, testing ropes, preparing the stage for tomorrow's performance. Most were enslaved men, their efficiency born from practiced repetition. They'd built these things before. Elijah approached a supply wagon, moving with the purposeful stride of someone assigned to be there. A white overseer glanced at him, taking in his size with brief interest. "You one of the new crew?" the man asked. "Yes, sir." Elijah kept his eyes down, his voice empty of everything but compliance. "About time. We're behind schedule. Grab that lumber and get it to the platform crew, and keep your mouth shut. There's quality folk coming through here, and they don't need to hear field talk." "Yes, sir." Elijah hoisted a load of boards that would have required 3 normal men to carry. The weight was nothing. The roll was everything. Just another laborer, another piece of the machine, another body among dozens doing exactly what they were told. He carried the lumber toward the scaffold, studying every detail as he approached. Guard positions, sight lines, weak points in the structure. The platform stood 12 feet high, accessible by stairs on 2 sides. Iron rings bolted into the deck where chains would anchor the condemned. Behind the platform, a pile of kindling and straw waited to fuel the flames. They would burn Ezekiel in full view of thousands. The sunset painted the scaffold in shades of amber and blood. Workers continued their preparations, testing the trapdoor mechanism, measuring rope lengths, ensuring everything would function smoothly when the moment came. Elijah set down his lumber and looked up at the empty platform, seeing his brother already there in his mind, chained, displayed, reduced to an object lesson in what happened when property forgot its place. Not while I breathe, Elijah thought. A bell tower chimed the hour. Sunset. Workers began securing tools and preparing to leave for the night. Guards took positions around the perimeter, settling in for the overnight watch. Elijah blended into the dispersing crowd of laborers, his massive frame just one more anonymous body among the city's working invisible. No one looked at him directly. No one wondered who he was or why he was there. He'd made himself into exactly what the system expected, a tool that served its purpose, without question. Tomorrow, that tool would turn in their hands. Dawn broke over Richmond like a held breath finally released. Elijah watched from the shadows of a tobacco warehouse as the city transformed around the scaffold. Vendors arranged their wares. Families claimed viewing positions. Guards changed shifts with military precision. The performance was scheduled for mid-morning, time to allow maximum attendance while keeping the schedule efficient enough to avoid disrupting commerce. Everything had its proper place in the machine. Even rebellion, if you understood the mechanism well enough. Throughout the previous evening, Elijah had moved through the city's margins like smoke through cracks. He'd found the places where enslaved workers gathered after dark, the narrow spaces between buildings where exhaustion briefly outweighed fear. He'd spoken in whispers, never staying long enough to draw attention, always keeping his face turned away from direct light. The words he'd shared were simple, specific. When the bell tower chimes 9, look to the platform. When you see flame, remember you outnumber them. Remember the exits. Remember each other. He hadn't asked for promises or pledges. He'd simply planted seeds in ground already prepared by generations of suppressed fury, then moved on before questions could form. Now he watched those seeds beginning to sprout. A woman selling bread positioned her cart slightly closer to the guard station than necessary. A stable hand lingered near the horses tied behind the platform. Workers setting up benches for wealthy spectators moved with calculated slowness, ensuring their tasks would remain incomplete until the exact moment Elijah needed them mobile. Small acts, individual choices, each one meaningless, alone. Together, they formed a pattern only someone trained to see fighting strategy would recognize. The guards noticed nothing. They expected compliance, so compliance was all they saw. At 8 o'clock, the prisoner wagon arrived. Elijah's breath caught, despite his preparation. The wagon carried 6 men, 4 genuine criminals by the state's definition, 1 horse thief, and Ezekiel. His brother had been beaten. That much was obvious, even from distance. Fresh bruises marked his face, and he moved with the careful stiffness of broken ribs, but his head stayed up. His eyes remained clear. When guards shoved him toward the scaffold stairs, he climbed under his own power, refusing to be dragged. They chained him to the iron rings at the platform's center, arms spread wide, body positioned for maximum visibility. The crowd pressed closer, thousands of faces turned upward with hungry anticipation. A minister mounted the stairs carrying a Bible and a prepared statement. He positioned himself beside Ezekiel, cleared his throat, and began reading a sermon about obedience, divine order, and the natural hierarchy that separated man from beast. Ezekiel looked directly at the crowd while the minister spoke. He didn't struggle against the chains or plead for mercy. He simply stood, impossibly tall despite everything meant to diminish him, and met the gazes of those gathered to watch him burn. Some people looked away. Others stared harder, as if trying to convince themselves they were witnessing something less than human. Elijah recognized the expression. He'd seen it on faces at the fighting pit. That desperate need to believe violence against another person was somehow justified, somehow different from simple cruelty. The bell tower began its 9 o'clock chime. Elijah struck a match. The tobacco warehouse where he'd hidden himself was lined with barrels of aging leaf, bone dry from months of curing. The fire caught instantly, spreading faster than anyone could react. Within seconds, flames shot through gaps in the walls, visible throughout the city square. Screams erupted. Guards turned toward the new crisis, the crowd's attention fragmented between the burning building and the scheduled execution. In that moment of split focus, Elijah moved. He'd positioned himself perfectly, close enough to reach the platform quickly, hidden enough to avoid premature detection, strong enough to do what came next without hesitation. The bread vendor overturned her cart directly in front of mounted guards attempting to organize a response. The stable hand released the horses, sending them panicking through the crowd. Workers abandoned their tasks and scattered, creating bottlenecks at every exit point. Chaos mirrored the pit perfectly. Elijah had learned those lessons well. How panic spread, how attention fractured, how a crowd of thousands could become a stampede of individuals thinking only of personal survival. He reached the scaffold as a second building caught fire. This one Elijah hadn't started himself, but he recognized the deliberate timing. Someone else had understood the signal. Someone else had chosen action over submission. Guards rushed toward the flames. The minister fled the platform entirely. Spectators trampled benches trying to reach safe distance. Elijah climbed the stairs 3 at a time, his size suddenly an advantage rather than liability. The chains holding Ezekiel were locked, but the iron rings bolting them to the platform were not. Elijah gripped one ring with both hands and pulled. The wood splintered. The ring tore free. Ezekiel stared at him, recognition and disbelief warring across his battered face. "Brother," he whispered. "Move," Elijah said. They descended together, still chained, as the city burned around them. Guards shouted orders, no one followed. The crowd had become a mob, flowing away from danger without coordination or control. Elijah led them not toward escape, but toward the trading hub, a 3-story brick building where slave sales were recorded. Futures were traded, and the entire system's documentation lived in leather-bound ledgers. The door stood locked. Elijah hit it with his shoulder once. The lock held. He hit it again, putting 6 feet 8 inches and 260 pounds of controlled fury behind the impact. The door exploded inward. Inside, clerks scrambled to gather papers. Elijah swept them aside like children, heading straight for the records room. Ezekiel followed, dragging his chains, understanding without words what his brother intended. The ledgers filled an entire wall. Decades of transactions, ownership transfers, bloodline documentation, profit calculations. Every enslaved person in Virginia existed somewhere in these pages, reduced to entries in a balance sheet. Elijah began throwing books through windows into the street below. Ezekiel joined him, each volume a small act of erasure, each shattered binding a name potentially freed from paper ownership. Clerks fled. More fires started spontaneously throughout the building as lamps overturned in the chaos. The flames found the scattered pages easily, hungry for documentation, eager to consume the carefully maintained records that gave the system its administrative legitimacy. By the time guards organized enough to respond, the trading hub was burning from inside, papers swirling through broken windows like dark snow, decades of ownership claims turning to ash in the morning light. Elijah and Ezekiel stood in the street, still chained together, watching the ledgers burn. Hours later, as true darkness settled over Richmond, the fires had been contained, but not forgotten. Smoke hung in the air like a shroud, turning moonlight gray and uncertain. The trading hub stood gutted, its windows empty eye sockets staring at nothing. The tobacco warehouse had collapsed entirely. 3 other buildings bore fire damage of varying degrees, some from planned sabotage, others from simple panic and neglect as people fled. The city crawled with militia, but their efforts lacked coordination. No one had expected resistance on this scale. No one had prepared for the possibility that the enslaved might organize, might communicate, might choose collective action over individual survival. The scaffold still stood in the square, its chains empty now, a monument to interrupted violence. Guards questioned witnesses, but descriptions contradicted each other wildly. The escaped prisoner had been 7 feet tall. No, 6 feet. He'd had help from a dozen conspirators. No, he'd acted alone. The fires were coordinated. The fires were accidents. The whole thing was planned. The whole thing was chaos. No one mentioned the second giant, who'd appeared like a ghost. No one wanted to admit they'd seen twin monsters moving through their carefully ordered world. By nightfall, survivors from the morning's uprising had scattered to every dark corner of the city. Some disappeared into the river. Others melted into crowds of free blacks, their status suddenly ambiguous in the confusion. A few simply walked away from their assigned posts and kept walking, trusting that burned records meant burned ownership claims. The bread vendor closed her destroyed cart and vanished before anyone thought to question her timing. The stable hand accepted his master's fury at the lost horses with downcast eyes, never mentioning how easily the knots had come loose. The workers who'd abandoned their tasks returned to plantations outside the city, carrying stories instead of wages, and Elijah and Ezekiel Carter disappeared entirely. They'd left the trading hub through a basement tunnel, an escape route built for wealthy clerks fearing slave revolts, now serving the exact opposite purpose. The chains binding them proved simple to remove once they'd stolen proper tools. Within an hour of the fire's peak, they were moving through Richmond's underbelly, guided by hands they never saw, fed by people who asked no questions, hidden in spaces that officially didn't exist. By midnight, they'd crossed the city limits. By dawn, they were 20 miles north, their tracks deliberately confused, their direction impossible to determine. They didn't speak during those first hours of flight. Words felt too permanent, too much like planning a future neither could guarantee. They moved with the silent coordination learned in the pit, each brother anticipating the other's needs, their steps falling in rhythm despite exhaustion and pain. When they finally stopped to rest in a dense thicket near a creek, Ezekiel broke the silence. "You came back," he said, his voice rough from disuse and beating. "Did you doubt it?" Elijah asked. Ezekiel touched his bruised ribs carefully. "I hoped. But hoping and knowing aren't the same thing." Elijah studied his brother's face in the pre-dawn light. The resemblance between them remained perfect. Same height, same build, same features shaped by identical genetics. But suffering had marked them differently. Ezekiel's recent capture showed in fresh wounds and a new wariness in his eyes. Elijah's solo journey showed in older scars and a harder set to his jaw. "We can't stay together," Ezekiel said quietly. "Two giants traveling as a pair. We're too easy to track." "I know. They'll be looking for us specifically now. The bounty will increase. The descriptions will spread." "I know that too." Ezekiel leaned back against a tree, closing his eyes. "Then why did you risk everything to pull me off that platform?" Elijah considered the question seriously. Because they were brothers. Because the master had tried to make them kill each other and they'd refused. Because property wasn't supposed to remember or choose or love. And doing all three was itself rebellion. "Because the system wanted us separated," he finally said. "So staying together, even briefly, is victory." They rested until midday, then separated at a fork in the creek. Ezekiel headed west. Elijah continued north. Neither looked back. The weeks that followed became legend, though the legends contradicted each other. A plantation in Georgia woke to find every lock broken and every enslaved person gone. Some said a giant had done it alone in a single night. A slave catcher in South Carolina was found dead with his own chains wrapped around his neck. A trader's wagon in North Carolina simply vanished, its cargo freed, its records burned. Were these the twins' work? One twin's work? Imitators inspired by Richmond's chaos? No one could say with certainty. What remained certain was that fear spread faster than facts. Plantation owners increased patrols. Slave catchers demanded higher fees. The insurance companies that had quietly profited from human property began raising premiums, calculating new risks they'd never considered before. Months passed. Winter came. The stories continued. Some said the twins had died crossing into free territory. Others claimed they'd separated permanently, each becoming his own ghost, haunting different regions. A few insisted they'd reunited somewhere in the north, living under assumed names, impossible to identify because no one expected enslaved men to simply become free men through will alone. The truth didn't matter as much as the mythology. In quiet moments, in the spaces between sunset and sleep, enslaved people throughout the South passed along a different kind of story. Not about escape or freedom, but about choice. About two men who'd been trained as weapons and chose to aim themselves at the system that forged them. About property that remembered. About brothers who'd looked at chains and decided no. An old woman in Mississippi whispered it to children while shelling peas. A field hand in Louisiana murmured it while planting tobacco. A house slave in Tennessee breathed it while serving dinner to a master who never noticed the words hanging in the air above his food. The warning spread like winter frost, touching everything it reached. Property can decide. Not should. Not might. Can. The distinction was everything. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.